The concert hall was packed. Thousands of fans screamed as the lights dimmed and the stage lit up. Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness himself, walked out with his familiar energy, his voice echoing through the arena. But on this night, something different happened. A stagehand quickly approached Ozzy and whispered something into his ear. In his hand was an envelope. At first, Ozzy looked confused. Then the crowd fell silent, waiting to see what was inside. Ozzy held the letter carefully. His rough hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone. "I don't usually do this," he said, "but this is something special." His voice cracked, and the audience leaned closer. He opened the letter and began to read aloud. The words were written by a young fan who couldn't be at the concert. This fan wasn't just any ordinary admirer. He was a boy battling a life-threatening illness. The boy's dream had always been to see Ozzy live, but his health had kept him confined to a hospital bed. The letter began with simple words of love. The boy explained how Ozzy's music had carried him through the darkest nights, when the pain was unbearable and hope seemed far away. He wrote, "Your songs made me feel alive when my body was shutting down. You gave me courage when I wanted to give up." The audience was silent. Not a sound could be heard, except Ozzy's shaky voice echoing across the hall. He paused several times, holding back his emotions. Some fans in the front row had already begun to cry. Ozzy read on. The boy shared how he would close his eyes and imagine himself standing in the middle of the crowd, screaming the lyrics with everyone else, feeling the vibration of the music in his chest. For him, Ozzy's concerts lived in his imagination. Then came the part that made Ozzy freeze. The boy wrote, "If I don't make it, I want you to know I'll be listening from the sky. Please, when you sing, think of me, because you are the reason I kept fighting." Ozzy lowered the letter for a moment. His lips trembled. The crowd waited in complete silence. The moment had already begun to feel larger than music. It felt like life itself was speaking through those words. The letter continued, and Ozzy struggled to find his voice. The fans were not screaming anymore. Instead, the arena was filled with an almost holy silence, as if everyone was holding their breath together. Ozzy read the next lines with tears forming in his eyes. The boy had written about his mother. She was the one sitting by his side every night, playing Ozzy's songs softly to help him sleep. "She said your voice was like medicine," the letter said. "She said your songs were stronger than the painkillers." Ozzy's hands shook. He put the letter down for a second and covered his face. The crowd clapped softly, encouraging him to continue. They weren't cheering like at a concert. They were comforting him like family. He took a deep breath and went on. The boy had explained how, when the nurses told him he might not survive the year, he put on Ozzy's music louder than ever before. "I thought, if this is my last night," the boy wrote, "I want to go out with your voice in my ears." A murmur went through the crowd. People were hugging each other, some wiping their eyes. This wasn't just a rock concert anymore. It had become something spiritual, something unforgettable. Ozzy stopped again and looked up at the crowd. "You all hear this?" he asked, his voice breaking. "This is why music matters. This is why we're here tonight." The fans screamed, "Yes," but it wasn't the usual roar. It was softer, emotional, almost fragile. He returned to the letter. "Even though I'm sick," the boy wrote, "I never felt alone, because I had your songs. You made me feel like I was part of something bigger, like I was standing with thousands of people who understood me." Ozzy's lips trembled as he read the final line of this section. "If I could have one wish, it would be to stand in front of you and say thank you. But if I can't, I want this letter to say it for me." Ozzy's eyes filled with tears, and this time he couldn't hide them. His voice cracked completely as he whispered, "God bless you, son." The arena was silent. Nobody moved. It was as if the entire world had stopped to feel this one moment with him. For several seconds, Ozzy stood frozen, the letter trembling in his hands. The crowd waited, not daring to break the spell. Then slowly, Ozzy lowered the paper and wiped his eyes. His face showed something his fans had rarely seen. Not the wild Prince of Darkness, but a fragile man overwhelmed by love. "This boy," Ozzy said softly. "He reminded me why I'm still standing here after all these years." His voice cracked again, but he continued. "When I started, I never thought the songs I screamed into a microphone would save someone's life." The audience erupted in applause, but it wasn't wild. It was warm. It was like the sound of thousands of hands clapping together to hold him up. Ozzy raised the letter again. "There's more," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He wanted me to read this part to all of you." The boy had written about the power of music. He described how every lyric, every guitar riff, felt like a friend whispering, "Don't give up." He said that when his body was weak, the music was his armor. "Your songs made me feel like a warrior," the letter read. Ozzy stopped, pressing his lips together. Then he looked at the crowd, his eyes red and wet. "You hear that? Music makes warriors out of us all." The fans shouted in agreement. Some lifted their hands. Some lit up their phones like stars shining for the boy who couldn't be there. The letter ended with a promise. "If I make it through this, I will come see you one day. And if I don't, I'll still be there, in every song, in every note, standing with the crowd." Ozzy couldn't hold it anymore. His tears fell freely, his body shaking. He turned his back for a moment, trying to gather himself. But the crowd chanted his name, not in madness, but in love. "Ozzy! Ozzy! Ozzy! Ozzy!" He turned back, lifted the letter high in the air, and shouted, "This is what it's all about." The arena exploded in emotion. Fans cried, hugged, and shouted. The darkness of the concert had turned into a light that nobody could explain. At that moment, Ozzy wasn't just a rock star. He was a man who had become part of someone's fight for life. Ozzy stood there, clutching the letter as if it were the most precious thing he had ever held. His voice had already cracked, but now, as he looked down at the words again, his body gave in. His shoulders shook, and for the first time in front of thousands, he openly broke down. The band behind him grew silent. The stage lights dimmed to a soft glow, and all eyes were on the man at the center. Ozzy pressed the letter to his chest, his tears falling freely, his mascara smudging across his cheeks. The crowd, instead of cheering, stayed silent. They respected the rawness of what they were witnessing. "I've been called many things in my life," Ozzy finally said, his voice hoarse. "Madman, Prince of Darkness, a crazy son of a gun. But tonight I don't feel like any of that. Tonight, I feel like a father reading the words of a son I never met." A loud sob came from somewhere in the front rows. Others joined in. People weren't hiding their emotions anymore. The entire arena had become a place of shared grief, love, and humanity. Ozzy tried to continue reading, but his tears blurred the ink on the page. He lowered the letter again, his hand covering his face. He turned to his bandmates and shook his head, as if to say, "I can't do this." But the crowd wouldn't let him stop. Thousands of voices rose, not in demand but in support. "You can do it," someone shouted. Another yelled, "We're with you, Ozzy." The entire arena clapped in rhythm, giving him strength. Slowly, Ozzy raised the letter once more. His voice trembled as he whispered, "This boy, he said my music made him feel alive. But the truth is, tonight he's the one keeping me alive." The fans erupted in applause. People waved their arms, some held up signs, and others lifted lighters and phone lights high into the air. It was as if the entire audience wanted to send their love directly to the boy who wrote those words. Then Ozzy's voice broke completely. He pressed his forehead to the microphone and sobbed. The sound of his crying echoed across the arena. He wasn't the invincible rock god anymore. He was a human being, broken by love and pain. The crowd did something no one expected. They began to sing for him. Thousands of voices carried one of Ozzy's songs into the air, filling the silence he couldn't. He stood still, clutching the letter, letting his fans lift him the way his music had lifted them for decades. For the first time in years, Ozzy wasn't the performer. He was the one being carried. The voices rose like a wave. Thousands of fans, from the front row to the very back of the arena, were singing together. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It was pure, raw emotion. The sound filled the air, trembling through the walls, reaching all the way into Ozzy's chest. Ozzy lifted his head slowly, his tears still glistening under the lights. He looked out at the sea of faces and saw something he would never forget. Grown men with tattoos and leather jackets were crying openly. Women held their hands over their hearts, rocking back and forth with the music. Teenagers waved their phones like glowing candles. Everyone had become one voice, one family, one answer to the letter. The crowd wasn't just singing a song. They were sending a message, to Ozzy and to the boy who had written the letter. A message that said, "You are not alone. We are all with you." Ozzy stepped back from the mic, holding the letter close to his chest. He let the crowd sing for him, his lips trembling as he mouthed the words. For a moment, the Prince of Darkness was simply a man being embraced by the very people he had carried through decades of music. Then, slowly, he walked back to the microphone. His voice was still broken, but he spoke with a strength that came from the audience itself. "Listen to them," he said, pointing out at the crowd. This is what love sounds like. This is what music is meant to do." The arena erupted in applause. People were no longer just watching a concert. They were part of a living, breathing miracle. Ozzy took a deep breath and looked back at the letter. Hay said, "If he couldn't be here, he wanted me to think of him when I sing. So tonight," Ozzy said firmly, "this song is for him." The band struck the first chords. The fans screamed, not in wild excitement, but in pure devotion. Ozzy closed his eyes, pressed the letter to his chest one last time, and began to sing. His voice cracked, raw and imperfect, but that night, it was more powerful than it had ever been. The crowd joined in, thousands of voices blending with his, carrying the boy's spirit across the arena. For that moment, the fan who couldn't be there was there, in every lyric, in every tear, in every trembling note that shook the walls of the stadium. And Ozzy knew the boy would never be forgotten. The song came to an end, but the feeling in the arena didn't fade. The last note echoed through the hall like a heartbeat, followed by silence so deep it felt sacred. Thousands stood frozen, their eyes wet, their souls shaken. They had come to see a concert, but they had witnessed something far greater. Ozzy stood at the center of the stage, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. His face was still wet with tears, but there was a new light in his eyes. Slowly, he raised the letter high above his head. The audience roared, not with wild cheers, but with a deep thunderous sound that shook the walls. A sound filled with love and respect. "This boy," Ozzy said into the microphone, his voice breaking but strong, "reminded me tonight why I ever sang a note. It's not for fame, not for money. It's for moments like this. It's for love. It's for family. And all of you, you're..." The crowd screamed his name again, over and over. "Ozzy, Ozzy, Ozzy, Ozzy." But he shook his head and pointed to the heavens. "No, not me. Tonight is about him. Tonight he's the star." People began to lift their hands, pointing upwards. Some cried openly, whispering prayers for the boy they never met but felt like they had known all along. It was as if the entire arena had become one giant heart, beating for the child whose words had touched them all. Ozzy placed the letter carefully on the stage floor, right next to his microphone stand. Then he knelt down in front of it, bowing his head. The audience fell completely silent, watching the legendary rock star show his most vulnerable side. It was a moment nobody there would ever forget. When he stood back up, his voice cracked one last time as he said, "Wherever you are, son, this one was for you." The band struck into another song, but the energy was different now. Every lyric, every chord carried weight. The crowd sang louder than ever, their voices rising to the rafters, carrying the spirit of that boy far beyond the walls of the arena. That night became legend. Fans who were there spoke about it for years, not just as a concert, but as the night when music turned into pure love, when Ozzy Osbourne broke down and showed the world his heart. And somewhere, whether in a hospital bed or beyond the stars, that boy's dream came true. He had stood with Ozzy on stage, not in body, but in spirit, and together, they left the whole world in tears.